Imagine walking into a room and not remembering your own name, your family, or even where you are. Now imagine sitting at a legendary piano and suddenly your fingers remember what your mind has forgotten. This is the incredible story of Margaret, an 84-year-old woman with severe dementia who stunned 2,200 visitors at Graceland when she sat at Elvis Presley's personal piano. What happened next defied everything doctors thought they knew about memory loss and proved that music truly is the language of the soul. Her performance didn't just bring tears to everyone's eyes. It rewrote the book on what's possible when the human spirit refuses to surrender. Margaret Thompson had lived a life filled with music. For over 40 years, she had been a piano teacher in Memphis, touching the lives of hundreds of students with her gentle guidance and extraordinary talent. She could play anything from classical, Mozart to contemporary hits, and her small studio apartment was always filled with the sound of beautiful melodies. But by 2023, at the age of 84, Margaret's world had been devastated by Alzheimer's disease. The progression had been cruel and relentless. First, she forgot the names of her students, then her favorite songs, and eventually, she couldn't even remember how to tie her shoes. Her daughter, Susan, had watched helplessly as her vibrant musical mother disappeared piece by piece. The piano in Margaret's apartment sat silent, covered in dust, a heartbreaking reminder of what once was. The disease had robbed Margaret of her independence, her memories, and seemingly her identity. She had been moved to Sunset Manor, a specialized memory care facility where she spent most days staring blankly at the walls, occasionally asking nurses if they knew where her mother was, her mother who had passed away 30 years earlier. The woman who once filled rooms with music now couldn't remember her own name when asked. Susan visited daily, bringing photo albums and playing recordings of Margaret's old piano performances, desperately hoping to spark some recognition. But Margaret would look at pictures of herself and ask, "Who is this lady?" She had become a stranger to her own life, trapped in a mind that betrayed her at every turn. The doctors explained that this was the natural progression of the disease. Memories fade, personalities disappear, and the person they once knew effectively ceases to exist. What made Margaret's case particularly heartbreaking was how complete the memory loss had become. Unlike some dementia patients who retain fragments of their past, Margaret seemed to have lost access to nearly everything. She couldn't remember her late husband, her career, her accomplishments, or even basic facts about herself. When staff members asked her simple questions like, "What's your name?" or "How old are you?" she would look confused and sometimes become agitated, sensing that she should know these answers, but finding only emptiness where the information should be. The medical team at Sunset Manor had tried various therapies, music therapy, art therapy, reminiscence therapy, but nothing seemed to reach Margaret. She would sit through sessions with a blank expression, seemingly unaware of her surroundings. Her case had become one that nursing students would study as an example of advanced Alzheimer's progression, a reminder of how devastating this disease could be. The trip to Graceland wasn't supposed to be about Margaret at all. Sunset Manor had organized a group outing for their residents, thinking that some of the older patients might enjoy visiting the iconic Memphis mansion of Elvis Presley. The facility often arranged such trips, believing that familiar cultural touchstones might spark memories or simply provide a pleasant change of scenery for their residents. Susan had been hesitant about including her mother in the group. Margaret's condition had been particularly unstable lately, with increased confusion and agitation. She worried that the crowds and unfamiliar environment might overwhelm her mother and cause distress. But Dr. Patricia Williams, the facility's head of memory care, encouraged Susan to let Margaret join the group, explaining that sometimes unexpected environments could produce surprising results in dementia patients. The bus ride to Graceland was largely uneventful. Margaret sat quietly next to her aide, occasionally looking out the window but showing no signs of recognition or interest. She didn't respond when other residents pointed out familiar Memphis landmarks or when the tour guide began sharing stories about Elvis's life and career. Susan, who had decided to accompany the group, watched her mother with a heavy heart, wondering if this trip was just another futile attempt to reach someone who was no longer their dot when they arrived at Graceland. The mansion was bustling with activity. It was peak tourist season, and the grounds were filled with Elvis fans from around the world. The Sunset Manor group was given special accommodations due to the residents' needs, including priority access to certain areas and extra time at each stop. Margaret moved through the mansion like a sleepwalker, guided gently by her aide, showing no reaction to the opulent furnishings or the guide's enthusiastic stories about the king of rock and roll. They toured the living room, the dining room, and the famous jungle room, with Margaret remaining completely passive throughout. Susan began to regret bringing her mother, thinking that this overstimulating environment might actually be harmful. The crowds were large, the music was loud, and there was constant chatter about Elvis's life and career. For someone with severe dementia, it seemed like sensory overload. As they moved through the house, other visitors couldn't help but notice the group of elderly residents. Some people whispered sympathetically about the challenges of caring for loved ones with dementia, while others seemed uncomfortable with the stark reminder of aging and memory loss. Margaret, oblivious to the attention, continued to shuffle along with the group, her expression blank and her eyes unfocused. The tour was nearing its end when they reached the music room, where Elvis's personal piano was displayed behind velvet ropes. The room was packed with over 2,200 visitors that day, all eager to see the instrument, where the king had composed some of his most famous songs. The music room at Graceland was electric with anticipation. Visitors crowded around the famous piano, where Elvis had spent countless hours composing and playing. The tour guide was in the middle of explaining how Elvis would often sit at this very piano late at night, working out melodies and lyrics for his next songs. The room buzzed with excited chatter as fans took photos and shared stories about their favorite Elvis memories. Margaret had been standing at the back of the group, seemingly oblivious to the excitement around her. But something began to shift as they entered the music room. For the first time that day, she showed signs of alertness. Her head lifted slightly, and her eyes seemed to focus on something in the distance. Susan noticed the change immediately. It was the first sign of engagement her mother had shown in months. Without warning, Margaret began to move forward through the crowd. Her aide tried to guide her back to the group, but Margaret had a determination that hadn't been seen since before her diagnosis. She pushed gently but persistently through the packed room, drawn by some invisible force toward the piano. Other visitors stepped aside, initially annoyed by the disruption, but quickly realizing that something extraordinary was happening. "Ma'am, you can't go past the rope," a security guard said as Margaret approached the barrier protecting the piano. But she didn't seem to hear him. Instead, she stood transfixed, staring at the instrument with an intensity that shocked everyone who knew her condition. Susan hurried forward, apologizing to the guard and preparing to lead her mother away. But Dr. Williams, who had also accompanied the trip, put a hand on her arm. "Wait," Dr. Williams whispered. "Look at her face." Margaret's expression had transformed completely. The blank, confused look was gone, replaced by something that could only be described as recognition. Not recognition of where she was or who she was with, but recognition of the piano itself, as if she was seeing an old friend after many years apart. The crowd had grown quiet, sensing that they were witnessing something special. Margaret reached out toward the piano, her fingers trembling slightly. The security guard looked uncertain, torn between following protocol and acknowledging that this was clearly no ordinary situation. That's when Susan made a decision that would change everything. "Please," she said to the security guard, her voice barely above a whisper. She was a piano teacher for 40 years. "She has severe dementia and hasn't spoken clearly in months. I don't know why, but something about this piano is reaching her." The guard looked around the room at the faces of 2,200 people, all watching this moment unfold, and made a decision that went against every rule in his handbook. He unhooked the velvet rope and stepped aside. The crowd held its collective breath. As Margaret slowly approached Elvis's piano, her movements becoming more sure with each step. As Margaret's fingers first touched the keys of Elvis's piano, something miraculous happened. The woman who couldn't remember her own name suddenly sat up straighter, her posture transforming from the hunched confusion of advanced dementia to the confident bearing of a master musician. The 2,200 people packed into the room fell completely silent, as if sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Margaret's hands found their position on the keys with startling precision. Without hesitation, she began to play "Love Me Tender," one of Elvis's most beloved ballads. But this wasn't just any performance. It was flawless, emotional, and filled with nuances that only a truly gifted pianist could achieve. Her fingers moved with muscle memory that transcended the devastating effects of Alzheimer's disease, proving that music lives in a part of the brain that dementia cannot always reach. The crowd was mesmerized. Many people began recording with their phones, instinctively knowing they were witnessing something that would never happen again. Tears streamed down faces as Margaret transitioned seamlessly from "Love Me Tender" to "Can't Help Falling in Love," her performance growing stronger and more confident with each note. The woman who hadn't spoken a coherent sentence in months was now communicating through music in the most profound way possible. Susan stood frozen, watching her mother transform before her eyes. The Margaret she remembered, the talented, passionate piano teacher, had somehow emerged from the fog of dementia to give one final, magnificent performance. Dr. Williams was frantically taking notes, knowing that what she was witnessing could revolutionize understanding of music therapy and memory retention in dementia patients. Not as Margaret played, something even more remarkable happened. She began to sing, her voice clear and strong for the first time in years. The lyrics to "Can't Help Falling in Love" flowed effortlessly, as if the song had been waiting inside her all along, protected from the disease that had stolen everything else. The acoustics of the room amplified her voice beautifully, and many visitors later said it was the most moving performance they had ever heard. The performance lasted nearly 15 minutes, with Margaret playing and singing multiple Elvis classics with stunning accuracy and emotion. She seemed completely in her element, lost in the music that had defined her life before the illness took hold. The crowd was completely captivated, many openly weeping at the beauty and tragedy of what they were witnessing. A brilliant musician saying goodbye through the one language that her diseased mind still understood. When Margaret finally lifted her hands from the keys, the silence was deafening. Then, spontaneously, all 2,200 people in the room began to applaud. It wasn't polite tourist applause. It was the kind of thunderous, emotional ovation reserved for once-in-a-lifetime performances. Margaret looked around the room with brief clarity, seeming to understand that something special had just happened, before the fog of confusion slowly returned to her eyes. Margaret's extraordinary performance at Elvis's piano became one of the most powerful demonstrations of music's ability to transcend the barriers of dementia ever recorded. The videos taken that day have been viewed millions of times worldwide, bringing hope to countless families affected by Alzheimer's disease and proving that the human spirit, expressed through music, can triumph even in the darkest moments. While Margaret returned to her quiet existence at Sunset Manor shortly after that day, her 15 minutes at Elvis's piano created a legacy that continues to inspire researchers, musicians, and families dealing with memory loss. Her story reminds us that sometimes the most profound moments of human connection happen when we least expect them. Like this video if Margaret's story touched your heart. Subscribe for more incredible human stories and comment below too. Share your own experiences with music and memory. Have you witnessed the power of music to reach someone with dementia? Your story could inspire others.